all the that are just really can spice up a meeting.
Indeed. Well, welcome everybody. I'm going to jump in and turn it right over to Dawn. But just wanted to say hi. I'm so glad everybody is here. It's so great to see all your faces. I'm just kind of going through. I've got my smaller computer because I'm working from home. So I can't see everybody's smiling face all at the same time, but it's great to see y'all. It looks like Chris is with us too. Great. Chris, so I'll turn it over to Chris and Don. Welcome, everybody. I'm so glad to see you all.
Yeah, thanks, Gabrielle. Yeah, no, I'm going to turn it straight to Dawn. Just happy to be here. Outstanding numbers again. I'm really excited for, our topic. It's of particular interest to me. So without anything further from me, Dawn, take it away.
Well, and I will also be quick. I will be passing the mic to our SPEP team in Milwaukee, Rachel Specht and Deshelle Parker. And you guys feel free to introduce yourselves once you take over. I'll stop sharing my screen so you guys can start sharing your screen to be able to present. But just real quick as the agenda, this is something I had attached in the email reminder. As you can see here, we're going to listen to Milwaukee SPEP team and learn more about how they've worked through the process of growing, evolving, and where SPEP lives now in their process of things. We'll move into an open forum discussion. I think last time we met was really, really great conversation and a lot of interesting information and nice to know we're sort of all on that same page of things we're, the challenges we're facing and barriers. But we also want to hear strengths and wins. So you can see here, we have a couple different questions we're going to be asking. So, everyone feel free, if you have one representative from your team, please, chime in. We definitely want to hear from you. Also, if you can see here, there's a SPEP Learning Lab directory. I will be sending out a Qualtrics survey. It's the easiest way I know to be able to capture everyone's information. So I have a nice running spreadsheet of everyone that joins that I send emails to, but I want to make sure I have everyone's specific title and your, address, things like that, just so I have a very comprehensive directory for us to have access to. It's by no means used for marketing. I'm not spamming you or sending you crazy things. It's just a way for us to keep tabs as far as everyone that's participating and all the jurisdictions and, that are doing SPEP or interested in doing SPEP, because I know we've had a few new attendees that we've invited to the list. And then we'll just have a quick wrap up. So I'm going to go ahead and stop share and pass it on over to Deshelle and Rachel.
All right, looks like we rocking and rolling. You ready to flow, Rach? You muted.
Looks like she's got too much stuff on her screen and can't figure out how to unmute, because I know that face. I've been there. I know that face.
Okay, things disappear on Zoom that don't disappear on Teams. So thank you for your grace while I reshare my screen here. Thank you so much.
Well, while we're getting the screen shared, I just want to take a moment to say thank you to everybody here. Thank you to Gabrielle and the SPEP Learning Lab team. This is something I know that's been a long time coming. I was so pleased to have this effort kind of launched to bring everybody together in a regular space. And I'm a nerd. I own that now. Now that I'm in my 40s, I realize that I'm a nerd. People actually say it to me. So the reason I'm so excited about it, and I'm so excited to share this PowerPoint with you all today because I'm a nerd. Like, so I own that. I embrace that. I didn't know that as a child, but I know it now. So I'm so happy to be here. I appreciate you all taking your time to be here and dive into this space with us. And I am going to turn it over to my lovely partner and colleague, Rachel Speck, to formally start the presentation and our introductions.
All right. So thank you so much, Deshelle. And we are excited to share this presentation. We definitely we have implemented SPEP over a period of time and years, and maybe getting close to a decade. But the things that we've learned have been amazing, and we wanted to share them here. And we were excited to meet with both Don and Gabrielle and share what our thoughts were. And we got their stamp of approval. And so we are not sharing anything outside the lines of what they are hoping we share. And so, but we are going to be transparent about what we've learned about the strengths and the challenges Milwaukee has experienced. Anyway, my name is Rachel Specht, and I'm the Quality Strategy Coordinator at Milwaukee County. And both Deshelle and I have worked on this project for many years now, and we will be co-facilitating this presentation. So I'd like to turn the time over to Deshelle to go over the agenda.
Thank you, Rachel. My name is Deshelle Parker. I am the Director of Community Supervision and Courts here in Milwaukee County. The formal title of our agency is Children, Youth, and Family Services, and we are a part of the Department of Health and Human Services. Today, we're going to talk to you about how we started, which has been over a decade, actually. So we're going to talk about what it looked like then, how far we've come, the value that was brought by SPEP, and the overall grant that SPEP was a part of, and that partnership. And then we're going to transition, and Rachel's going to talk to you about the challenges that we experienced over the years. And then we're going to close up, and both of us are going to share with you what's next for Milwaukee County after talking about the value and the challenges and where we're going to go from here. So with that being said, let's dive into the next slide. So let's talk about Milwaukee's journey. Oh my God, oh my God, oh my God, I'm so excited. Okay, where did we start? Ironically enough, and this is a part of why it's so important to me, this is how I got my job here. This is how I started, is because of this grant. And a part of the grant was that they actually needed staff. You had to have staff dedicated to this process. And I got paid like that. Ironically enough, this has nothing to do with the PowerPoint, but this is the story I love to tell. Melissa Graham, who is in this room right now, was actually doing a presentation on the JJRI grant, which I'm going to get into, and the SPEP process. And I was in a whole nother world. I was as a program manager for a private treatment foster care agency, and I was a part of a meeting for the county to renew the contract with that agency. And as a part of that meeting, Melissa was presenting on JJRI and this SPEP opportunity. And all I remember is hearing her say, "We're doing things differently." And my light bulb went on. And the reason I was there, I actually forgot to take notes. I just completely disengaged with my purpose. And so my current job, I got an F for that meeting and what I was supposed to do. But what I remember distinctly was that I was so engaged because prior to hearing that message from Melissa, I wanted nothing to do with Milwaukee County's legal system. I was born and raised here, had several family members and different experiences that interface with the legal system, the youth system, as well as adult system. And I was actually working in child welfare and was leaving that space and doing stuff in the private spaces and for private organizations and nonprofit organizations. And so I was done with the system, essentially. So it was really a pivotal moment in my life to hear her say that they were doing something different with the youth justice system. It really resonates with me and my story because it changed my trajectory significantly. And so I did something that I never do. I actually went up to Melissa and introduced myself. Ironically, I already had an interview set up for like the following week for the quality assurance specialist job. However, I already planned that I wasn't going to go because when I figured out it was for youth justice, I wanted nothing to do with that. So at the time, I was just filling out lots of applications and didn't really know what that was for, but I knew I liked the words quality assurance as it related to health and human services. But when I realized it was for youth justice, I was just going to skip that interview. It wasn't going to happen. But when I realized that position was connected to youth justice and what Melissa was talking about, my light bulb went on and I actually networked. And if you know me at all, that is not something I do. I hate fake conversations. I hate networking, but my life changed. And I went up and introduced myself to Melissa, and I went to that interview, and the rest is history. I'm now the director of the Youth Justice Community Services Division and Court. So that's how significant this grant, this process, that's how significant it is to me in my life. So I'm going to share with you what the experience was locally, but I think I'd be remiss if I didn't share with you exactly how it actually changed the trajectory of my career path and impacted me in a way that I just never thought was going to happen. So it's much deeper than a process. Now, with that being said, the SPEP tool was a part of a grant that we received. It was the Juvenile Justice Reform and Reinvestment Initiative. JJRRI is what we called it. It was a federal grant offered by OJJDP. It was a time period of about 3 years, of 2013 through 16, and we started, or they started, essentially the process of writing for this grant in 2012. So if we count that, it's been a decade, it's been 12 years since all of this has started. And with that being said, the main purpose was to provide this local jurisdiction, with this evidence-based tool, the SPEP, to rate services delivered to youth in the system. And that was kind of the goal. The grant partners, we had Peabody Research Institute, we had Center for Juvenile Justice Reform, which was at Georgetown University, and then Urban Institute was also a part of it to do an evaluation. And so the sites was the state of Iowa, the state of Delaware, and then the state of Milwaukee. Milwaukee is actually a county. It is a city and a county, but you notice I got state there because the way Milwaukee operates, we are so siloed and so heavy with red tape that we are often referred to as the state of Milwaukee and not just Wisconsin. And so we were literally the only county in a grant with other states because we had just as much red tape and stuff and things as a full state would. And so that is where we started. And this initiative aligned with several other initiatives that we had going on at the same time. So we were on the reform train. Essentially, we were already on that track. And so we started to implement the YASI, or the Youth Assessment Screening Instrument, as an evidence-based tool. We were also a partner and involved in JDAI, which is the Juvenile Detention Alternatives Initiative. And so there was several other things that were going on at the same time. And this fell right in line with that in terms with direction that Milwaukee County was taking. Next slide. So let's dive into the value brought by SPEP. Interesting. So if I could say anything as it relates to the value brought by SPEP, this is what I want you to remember. I'm going to go over this slide and talk about what all these things mean, but this is what I want you to remember. It changed the conversation. It changed the conversation from focusing on what that youth did and the offense, and it changed it to the things we can control during this snapshot of time that we have with them. Focusing on risk levels, proper assessments, dosage, proper services. Are the services what they say they are, or are they something else? It changed the conversation in a way that mattered. It mattered to me as a community member. It mattered to me as a Black woman. It mattered when it came to making an impact in the legal system. Because if the legal system was working, we done worked ourselves out of a job by now. So the fact that something needed to change was pivotal. So if you remember nothing else about what I said, what this did was change the conversation to things that mattered and that we can control during that snapshot of time that we have with these babies. And I say babies, you're going to hear me go back and forth between youth and babies. And I say that because every one of these youth we serve is somebody's baby. It's much easier to not think of it that way. It's much easier to call them a name that's like adolescent or juvenile because that helps you do your job. But the reality is that's somebody's baby. And you got somebody's baby out here hurting somebody else's baby. That's the work we do. And so it's important to keep that in context when we're talking about all these numbers and we're throwing out words like automation and dosage and things like that. At the core of it, this is someone's baby. And that's what we do. So with that being said, what is the value brought? What did it change for us? How did it change the conversation? Well, let's start with data automation. When I tell you that we were getting boxes out of the basement where there were mice and there were spiders and spider webs, and we were pulling out files and taking one piece of paper for one youth, looking at it and saying, this whole piece of paper is 1 hour on one day, putting that in a spreadsheet, turning that page, picking up another piece of paper saying, this is 2 hours for one youth. And now I have to put that in the spreadsheet. And we had to go through files and boxes on top of boxes that we were getting out of the basement to try to gather this information. That is where we were when we started with SPEP. So the need and the amount of staff and the capacity that was going to just trying to quantify or get dosage information was overwhelming. Is like not even the word. So when I tell you that painted the picture and it created the story and the reason for why we needed to do better with how we were gathering data, the systems that we were using, the conversations that we were having, data automation is like the words do no justice for what it changed and the impact it made in our system. We didn't even have this. We had to go get papers out of the basement to be able to answer the question about dosage, which meant we were not having the right conversation. And so even just to start having the right conversation, we had to change the way we was thinking. We had to change the way we were doing the work that we were doing. And as a result of automating the data, we got all kinds of wins from that. We are now able to disaggregate and analyze data in a way that we never were before. And that's all because we were just trying to SPEP. That's all we wanted to do. We just wanted to SPEP. That was it. We have nothing to fill in. So if we need to SPEP, we have to do this first. So it changed the way we was doing everything. Now, just because we was trying to SPEP, we're able to disaggregate and analyze our data. We're able to identify racial disparities in a way that we knew it was happening, but we couldn't quantify it. We couldn't prove it. I can tell you that information anecdotally, but now we're in a place where I can tell you for this specific service that is supposed to get a minimum of 26 weeks of service. I can tell you how many of our youth got that minimum and then disaggregate that data and tell you how many fewer of our Black and brown youth actually hit that target in comparison with the white counterparts. I would have never been able to tell you that story if we were still keeping files in the basement with spiders. So just because we was trying to SPEP, we're now able to do that in a way that we never could before. We have the ability to track our youth engagement in service delivery, because in trying to train our providers and even get them to enter this data into a system that we now have created, mind you, never mind the work it took to do that, but just to get them to enter it, we now know if you actually given them a service. All we knew before was that we made a referral. But if you ain't putting no data in the system, we know that you're not actually engaging them. That's a different conversation that now we get to put the focus on that we didn't get to put the focus on before. And then in addition to that, we have our dispositional matrix. And many of you may or may not know what that is, but it's basically another evidence-based tool that supports this entire process. And it helps us use risk scores to determine the level of intervention that we have with any youth. So the YASI that I talked about before, which is the evidence-based assessment instrument that we use, whatever risk score comes from that, instead of it just, you know, the intervention or the amount of service or contact standards or any of that you're doing, it was just kind of left up to, however that staff felt, whatever they thought they should do. If they woke up on this side of the bed that morning and they wanted to be this way, then they could be that way. But now we got evidence-based tools to tell you that the risk score is low, moderate, or high, and this is how this should be going. This is what the intervention level should be, and these are what the services should be. Again, we would not have been able to do that had we not been trying to SPEP. We was just trying to SPEP. That's all we was trying to do. And so in terms of data automation, it has been a significant amount of benefit that our organization has been able to gain from just trying to SPEP. looking at the data, being able to quantify it matters because that's what we can control. Now, the magic that happens when they get to the service provider and is it a connection and then what happens and what are they talking about? All of that we can't control. But we can't control this. And this helps take our time and our capacity and all of our energy and focus on the things that we can't control that matter. In addition to that, the alignment of our provider network with research, that's what we now can do as a result of SPEP. There's many people in our organization that can rattle off. The SPEP was a meta-analysis that included over this many hundred studies that, like, if you don't know nothing else, you know that about it. And basically, and this is a part of the tagline that I would often say to providers when we've been meeting with them and bringing them on board with this, is that the SPEP is not trying to tell you to do a cartwheel in a blue suit out the window and then everything is going to be okay. It's not trying to invent something or lie to you and give you some kind of magic. It's saying, based on what you already been doing, this is the impact of it. That's what it's saying. So for folks who are already in the field who think they know everything already, this is an analysis of what you've been doing. And this is the impact of what you've been doing. And so being able to have that conversation based on that meta-analysis went a long way. It went a very long way with folks who didn't really want to change. I had folks, providers, stand right up and tell me to my face that if you're going to make us do all of this, what's the benefit of being in your system? And I had more than one provider stand up and say that to me. And I just had to be authentic and say, I can't tell you that. The reason you do this work has to be intrinsic. But this is why we're changing and what we're changing. And so the way we communicated with our provider network changed. We partnered with them in a way that we never did before. It increased all of our knowledge just around how we have this conversation about the meta-analysis. And then we was able to leverage dosage targets to improve the positive outcomes of youth. When I gave you that example before, when it came to disaggregating data and talking about racial disparities, that actually gives that specific provider quantifiable information about how much service you're delivering and whether or not you're hitting the minimum and how that actually connects to research. It's not some magic 8-ball. It's actually a map that can tell you what you're shooting for and why. And that's tremendous value with how we partner and how we work with and how our providers are not our, whipping posts, if you will. They are partners in this work with us. And so it's important that we treat them that way and we offer them information, research, and ways to collaborate that's different than coming with a red ink pen and just telling you what you ain't doing. What we also did was develop a provider investment measurement tool. And it was a tool specific that came out of SPEP and our kind of CQI process, which I'll talk a little bit about at the end of this slide. But creating all of those tools and the benchmarks within them was, again, about how we related to our providers and telling them that there's things that matter, right? There's all kind of things that you do and all kind of red tape that you have to, and hoops that you have to jump through for different licensings and things of this nature. However, what we want to do is measure the things that matter. And so we collaboratively with our providers developed a tool based on the research that the SPEP provided us, and then graded you on that tool. And we made that a part of the SPEP report. And this is transparent. Are you coming to the provider forum meetings? Are you a part of our ambassador group? Are you participating? Are you doing your action plan? When we show up later to see if you did your action plan, do you have it? Do you even know what it is? These are the kinds of things we put in an investment measurement tool. Not, did you fill out this form? Licensing can do that. We want to know. We want to measure your investment in this process. And so the whole way that we looked at our providers and partnered with our providers, it changed significantly. And it informs is one of the things that we're going to be keeping, and we're going to talk about later at the end of this presentation about how much value it brought to how we partnered with our providers and didn't treat them as though they were just a paid resource that needed to jump through the hoops that we tell you to jump through. Third is the development of a quality team. Of course, I'm biased. That's how I got my job, right? Yeah, so there's that. But given the fact that this really touched me in a different way, it meant that I came into this process with a different kind of energy, a different kind of fire. And it went from having a grant funded position, and I had to prove essentially that y'all need to keep me when this grant is over. So the fervor that I handled this project with and that I attacked this with was very different. But now we're in a place where we have a quality team. It's no longer a grant funded position. And so when I tell you the value brought by SPEP, we didn't have a quality anything before this grant and the SPEP process. SPEP said you have to have dedicated quality staff in order to do this. And that's what we're funding as a part of this grant. So just because we were trying to SPEP, we got a quality assurance specialist role. Now we have a quality management team. And CYFS does not know how to operate without quality. We go to them for everything. You have staff asking them to just update the master list. You know that's not your secretary, right? That's quality, but that's how much they're relied upon to deliver and show up. So when it comes to having a quality team, again, prior to SPEP, we didn't even have a quality staff. It wasn't even a component of youth justice. There was no reason to talk about quality in youth justice because all we did was approach youth from a punitive perspective and focus on their offense. And they came with the offense. So all we wanted to know was what you did and did you do it again? Now we're having a different conversation and quality matters. We have policies and procedures. I'm not going to tell you how many. I want to say roughly about 100 now. So probably we can scale back on some of that and reconcile some things and do some things differently. But I'm just trying to say it's because of SPEP that we had to develop policies. And we maybe got a little policy crazy. And we're doing a revision right now. I'm going to just say that. We're in the process of revising and moving our policies to a different system and some other things. But again, it's because we were trying to SPEP that we had to create them. We implemented a client satisfaction survey. Like nobody ever asked whether or not the youth justice participants were satisfied with what they got. That was never even part of the conversation. Who cares if you're satisfied? You did something wrong, and all you need to do is not do it again. That's all we talked about was recidivism and the offense. What do you mean satisfaction? How do you even develop questions to ask them if they're satisfied from being involved with a non-voluntary legal system? Well, we had to figure it out. Again, that's a result of the quality team, and that's something that we have now that is managed regularly. It's just a regular part of the way we do business. It provided training. Quality provides training and technical assistance to our provider network as a result of the training and technical assistance that was provided through this grant. So we modeled what was being given to us for others. And now, again, the reliance on the quality management team, training and technical assistance is what they spend a majority of their time doing. And that's, again, because of what SPEP brought to us. And it's just a part of our culture and the way we operate now. And that collaborative provider culture, like I just can't begin to tell you how valuable that is. When I have providers telling me that they've been involved with the legal system for 20 years and never had they been engaged in this way prior to the way we engage them around SPEP, that speaks volumes. That means that something different is happening. They got experience a couple of decades before I even got in the game. And they're telling me that this is different. They've never been asked prior to something going into play. They've never been asked to collaborate and develop it together and be a part of rolling it out. That approach had never been considered. But that's the way we roll now. That's what happens. And again, that's because we was trying to SPEP. We had to figure out a different way to do it if we wanted them to do it. And so we had to change our approach. And again, that's how we operate regularly now. And then the blueprint, the youth justice framework. Again, we didn't have one prior. And when I finish up with the CQI, I'll show you an example of what that looks like. But at the core of it, the whole point of this is that the way we approach the work significantly changed as a result of the SPEP. It's more than a score because the components that you need to measure in order to develop the score is actually what we should be focusing on. That's how it changed the game. And so when we get to barriers, we're going to show you exactly how much we didn't score and how many scores we never got. after all of this work I just laid out for you here, we're gonna connect the dots and show you how much effort, how much capacity, how much money, how much people resource, how much time that went into this, even though we didn't get scores. We still got all of this value from it. So it's not about the score. That's how it started. And we was dead set on getting there. And Melissa was the overachiever with me. It was me and her in the beginning. Honestly, doing this ourselves. I remember being in the office at 10 o'clock at night crying because every time I print this report out, is typos in it that I didn't find when it was on the screen. And I'm like in here by myself crying. And if I don't get this wrong, right, I'm gonna lose my job and all these things. There's people in here that don't even know that kind of stuff was going on. But that's how much work it took to be able to glean the value. And so was it heavy in the beginning? Yeah, it was heavy in the beginning. Was it worth it? I wouldn't change it for the world. I wouldn't change it for the world. And I got to meet some dope people along the way. So that was also an awesome cherry on top of the cake. So the last thing in terms of the value brought was our CQI cycle. That's something that's actually been lifted up in a couple of other spaces. We was able to do some presentations with other partners, CJJ and Urban along the way because of the full cycle that we was able to implement that SPEP was a part of. And the concept of it is very similar to other cycles. When you think about performance evaluation, it's not just that one evaluation that you do, right? It's about all of the things you do along the way before you get to that evaluation so that the things in that evaluation are not a surprise, so that you've been working with whomever you're evaluating the entire time. You've been meeting with them, you've been talking with them, you've been sharing resources, you've been talking about challenges. All of that stuff has been happening over the course of the year. So when you get to the point of writing a report, it's not a surprise to anybody. And that's what the CQI cycle is all about. And so we built that in a way, again, using a collaborative nature with our providers, using the research, using our investment measurement tool, and all of the things we were learning from a part of being a part of this grant. We organized a provider ambassador group. So what we did was actually reach out to our network and say, who wants to be a part of this with us? We want to formalize this and create an ambassador group. And it was a group of maybe about 6 or 7 different providers. And then they had backups. And then we created meetings and we created this investment tool together. We created the whole CQI process together, the cycle, the plan, all of the different parts and pieces, the action plan that went with it. We did all of that with our providers. What matters to you? What's going to be easier for you to do? This is what we need. How do we marry that with what you got to do? How do we make some other requirement that you already have match this so that you're not doing extra? How do we do this? How many days do we need to lapse between here and here for you to be able to get it and actually implement it? We asked all of those real questions and we created a CQI cycle with our provider ambassador group, and then we rolled it out with them. We let the provider ambassadors actually present it to the other providers. We had them be a part of it. We had them test it before we actually roll it out. When we go and we revise something or we roll out a policy for providers, the ambassador group looks at that policy first. They give their input on it. They help revise it, say what works, what's not going to work. No, we can't do that in 3 days. How about 7? Well, 7 is too long because it's going to do this. How about we land at 5? And that's the way we work with our provider ambassador group. And we still use them today for other initiatives that have nothing to do with SPEP, but that ambassador group is still strong. It's a part of the way we regularly work. We added annual site visits to that process. And that is when we didn't just roll out the action plan or the training or any of that. We came and we toured your agency. We sat down and we talked with you. We looked at your action plan together. If the goal you put in there, you didn't really understand and you was just trying to get the checkbox checked, we said, let's talk about it. Let's revise it. Let's do something that matters. Let's do something that works and is going to be more practical to implement. And we sat down with you and we did that together. We told you about the things that were going on here, the changes that we're making. We were transparent about we're having staffing issues. We're having this kind of crisis. We're having this. Oh, that looks like what you got going over here. We ain't magical people that have all the answers. We're people too. We're working in this system and we have the same end goal. And so those annual site visits, again, which are still going on today, Rachel and her team just wrapped them up last month for this year. They're still a priority and they still take time. And I must admit that because we rely so much on the quality team and I'm no longer in that role, I get a little jealous when they get busy during that quarter of the month and they like, we got site visits, I gotta go. And I'm like, but I wanted, okay. I guess I can't, I mean, technically I was a part of creating that, so I can't get mad now. But, you know, at the end of the day, all of that stuff is still alive and well. And then the action plans. I've talked to you about that. These are all pieces of a CQI cycle that we run every year, and pulling the data for SPEP, analyzing the data, trying to SPEP. All of that is a part of the process for the CQI cycle. And so honestly, next slide, Rachel, we're going to get more into what it looks like to try to SPEP. But this is an example of the blueprint that came as a result of the grant. So after we did the work with the SPEP and we're trying to implement it and we're working, we now had a context for the kind of conversation that we needed to be having. It no longer was about the offense and whether or not you did that thing again. We now having a conversation about how effective are our operations. We're having a conversation about individualized service delivery. We're still having a conversation about community accountability. That didn't go away. But now we're changing what we're focusing on. And this was 10 years ago. So this blueprint has evolved significantly. But again, we didn't have it before we had to SPEP. We was having the same conversation about what you did and whether you did that thing again. As a result of trying to SPEP, we started to reframe the conversation and look at youth justice, because we no longer use the word juvenile. We don't call them probation officers. Our name is Children, Youth, and Family Services. That don't sound nothing like a legal system, do it? I know. But the point is, we're no longer only focused on the thing you did and whether you did that thing again. SPEP changed the conversation for us. And so with that being said, I'm going to turn it over to Rachel to talk about the challenges that came as a result of us trying to SPEP.
Thanks, Deshelle. While the benefits of SPEP far outweigh the challenges, over the years, we've consistently struggled with the same SPEP components as it relates to using the SPEP tool to fidelity. And we're going to talk a little bit more about this, and I'll walk you through what some of those things are. And I know I'm preaching to the choir here, and it's something that we all struggle with, but transparently, like, capacity has always been an issue. The certification process to SPEP is lengthy and takes time to learn all the components. It is not something you learn overnight to apply. There are many different steps and components to learn as we worked to use SPEP to fidelity. We have staff turnover. I know that we are not alone in that, whether it's our own internal quality staff or our provider staff. The turnover has been a challenge in terms of maintaining the ability to practice applying the SPEP to fidelity. And the time spent calculating the scores. It's lengthy. It is something that, we have to consider the risk score. We consider was it in the research? Do we have enough data? Was the cohort big enough, right? Like all of those things in order to get a score. However, the value, as Deshelle has said, is still aligning ourselves with the body of research that drives the process, right? Like, do we know that kids are getting the services they're referred to, and are they reaching the minimum targeted dosage amounts that SPEP tells us when they reach those, the long-term outcomes have a better chance of being positive. And not only that, in terms of capacity, SPEP was only a small part of what the quality team is responsible for. But the SPEP activities could pretty much consume from July to October in terms of being able to make sure that all the SPEP scores were up to date, all the reports were up to date, making sure we have all the services in order, and is everything classified appropriately? You know, all of those things happen throughout the course of the year. They happen during the site visits. They happen through the course of other performance measure review and update. There are so many parts and pieces to SPEP, and yet it was only one small thing that the quality team is responsible for doing. We do the data limitations, and I'm sure some of you have experienced some of these things. Do you remember when Deshelle said we automated SPEP in our data system? Well, we also have IT staff turnover. We have yet to fix the glitches in our JPM juvenile management system that would allow us to attain automated SPEP scores. But along the way, we found the value in digging into the data manually and continued to apply the tool manually, because then we started looking at the other stories that the data would tell us. We would aggregate and analyze the data and hope that it would tell us stories about what's happening with the services and the youth in our system. But it was also often incomplete. We're missing discharge dates. We're missing, the number of staff and the cohort sizes. There are parts and pieces that we're missing along the way. And by the time we were disseminating the data results, it was the data we were reporting out on was approximately 18 months old. And so because of that, it's not relevant to what's happening right now, right? Some of the other challenges we experienced with the Milwaukee infrastructure is all the Milwaukee County service areas had different networks and different network requirements. And even though our youth may be served by those networks, we had no ability to hold them accountable for gathering dosage data when we were not the payors. There was no way to go about service classification and dosage data collection, as our youth justice kids were served by many of the county agencies. Even in our network, we had fee-for-service providers that documented service dosage one way, and then we had our program data and bundled services data that we collected in different ways in our same system. Fee-for-service dosage data was easy to collect because that's the way the providers needed to enter case notes and get paid. So that was easy. We knew that we were getting accurate amounts or accurate data that way because we know the providers needed to get paid. But we also have another automated way to collect the program data and the classified services and we classified the services occurring in the programs. But because it wasn't tied to any payments process, it made the data collection in those programs that have bundles, different types of services within the bundle. It was very difficult. And it was also for the providers, something else they had to do while they're serving the youth. So when evaluating the data, it was clear that we were not probably receiving all the data that we were hoping to receive. And in terms of provider management, like some of the challenges there is anytime we add other responsibilities, there's resistance, right? Like when it's not attached to payment or anything else, it's something, they view it as something else to do. And we did encounter that in the beginning. Most of them now are on board, but the main issue that comes up frequently is the data entry staff turnover. We usually discover that someone has left the agency, maybe in the annual site visit or by mistake or by accident. The quality team provides training. The quality team is then engaged to provide training and support for the provider to catch up. And it takes very time consuming and can take hours at a time to get a provider up to date based on what the needs are. And the other challenge some of the other challenges we experienced were the program services are ever changing, right? We have made the request repeatedly for changes to happen annually in order to achieve clean data sets, but sometimes the application of that request doesn't happen consistently. And service classification is a process. And with most other things, we almost need more time in the day to get it done, right? And at minimum, classification is discussed once a year with each program provider to ensure that we are collecting, to ensure basically that the data we are collecting is capturing the services that are occurring currently in the program. So those are some of the challenges that we came up against, and but I don't think all is not lost. I want to talk to you a little bit more about the scoring, and then after that we'll talk about what we plan to keep and what we plan to retire. So as you can see here, as you all are familiar, there are 4 different reasons that a provider may not receive a SPEP score, right? They're not included in the original body of research. AOTA and sexual specific services are examples of that. The cohort size has to be 10 or more. And you can see in 2016, right, we had 52 different services that didn't receive a SPEP score because we had not 10 or more youth that we were receiving data on that were in a cohort in a calendar year. The good news, as you look at this, is that, and what we have seen is that there is there's provider network alignment with what the research tells us is more effective in interventions with youth. And so you can see over time, like there were fewer and fewer services that were SPEP'd that didn't receive a score because of cohort. That's progress, right? Those are wins, right? They're looking at the research and saying, okay. And then we also had, like Deshelle said in the beginning, we had providers leave the network because they didn't want to participate. That's okay, but we have the providers in our network that are willing to collaborate and work alongside us in partnership to achieve this. So, but at the end of the day, we spent more time documenting what we couldn't SPEP to fidelity than actually SPEPing. And as you can see in 2022, of all the services in our network, 12 of them received a SPEP score. So for us, it's not about the score. It's the conversation and the components of the tool that has really helped our provider network and CYFS align in our intentions. So in short, the most valuable takeaway we have is that we have a body of research that our providers are aligning themselves with in dosage and program design with the goal of controlling what we can control and with the intention of improving our long-term positive youth outcomes. All right. What is next? I'm going to transition back to Deshelle to talk about what is next for Milwaukee County and the SPEP tool.
Thank you, Rachel. So we're going to retire the scores. After all of that work and effort to get to 12, it's just not enough. It's just not enough. Especially in my role as a director now, I have to look at capacity. I have to consider how my staff are spending their time and make decisions, tough decisions about what we prioritize. And so we're going to retire the scores. But I'm going to let you take this cartoon in for a minute because I think it describes exactly what, if you're doing SPEP, this is your world. So at the end of the day, we can add the numbers, we can multiply, we can do what you want, but it's not a SPEP score. It's not the SPEP score. It don't meet the requirements. It's not doing it to fidelity. Mark Lipsy said, like all the things, right? At the end of the day, it just don't work. It just don't work. The data is only as good as what's going in. And so if it's not going in and it's wrong, we can't use it. So not a SPEP score, we're retiring the score. But let's talk about what we're keeping. And it's tons of great things at the end of the day. So our data infrastructure, I've talked at length about the different things that we're able to do when I talked in the beginning around the value that it brought. So we keeping that. That's going nowhere. We would not be going back to the basement with spider web papers and mice in the boxes. We will not be going back to that. That's not an option. And I'm putting together some recommendations right now to talk about some of the things I think need to be changing in terms of our KPIs and what we're collecting and what's happening in order to continue to optimize our youth justice continuum. So classification of all our network services, as Rachel said, it's a difficult process, but it's a conversation we should be having. If we're paying a provider to provide a service, we should know what that service is, not have to guess. Now I have to look at papers and then go and observe the service and see that what you're doing is completely different than what's in that scope of work. That's not okay. That's not okay. So classifying services and having conversations about, are you doing what you actually say you're doing? That's a fair conversation to keep. The collection and analysis of that dosage data, but yeah, we're keeping that too. That's the part of the conversation we need to be having. It's important that we know and we engage our providers in what's happening, and not just around payment, but we're talking about impact. And so not just are you getting paid for what you're giving, right? And it's what you're giving, what you say you're gonna give it, what you say you were supposed to give, but the impact. Are we hitting the minimum targets? And what are the barriers to that? Let's have conversations and build action plans around that. The use of the YASI score, or that evidence-based tool to determine youth intervention level, that's going nowhere. That YASI is going nowhere. In fact, the YASI tool, we were the first to use it in the state of Wisconsin. It's now been adopted by the state of Wisconsin. And so the YASI tool is a requirement for every county in Wisconsin. And we are champions and leaders in that space and in that process. And because the state has adopted it, we now don't have to carry the lift of fidelity for training around that YASI tool. It's not strictly on our shoulders anymore. It's not something that's offered by the state for Milwaukee County and all the counties across Wisconsin. So the YASI is going nowhere. Assessing youth and intervening as a system based on what that assessment tells you is the way we're going to operate moving forward. No more, how did you wake up today? What side of the bed did you get out of on? And this is how we're going to treat youth and families today. No more of that. No more of that. How we manage our providers, that's going nowhere. That's going nowhere. Having providers say directly to me, I've been involved in this system for almost 20 years, and not once did anybody ask me how or what I think before they roll something out. That's not a part of the system I want to be a part of. That's not a system I want to be a part of. And so we will be keeping our collaborative approach to how we engage providers in the things that we do. We're going to have to reimagine the quality measures, and we can do that now that we have a SPEP learning lab. We want to do them and revise them based on things that are really relevant for us, especially as we're getting away from the scores. We have a number of other initiatives that we have engaged in and overlapped over the years, and so we want to align those quality measures with the things that are very relevant for Milwaukee County. And lastly, developing our network based on not just the research from SPEP, but the social determinants of health. We now have a table that we use that aligns the components of the target dosage and the research from SPEP. It aligns it with the social determinants of health, and the way that we implement or decide what services we need to add to our network is based on that table. So it changed the way we operate. It's no longer that sounds good, or I know such and such that knows such and such. None of that is irrelevant in the continuum of services that we have. And that's based on research and social determinants of health, which is talking about root causes for why youth enter the justice system in the first place. That's what matters. That's how the conversation changed. And then our quality management team. Of course, I'm biased here, okay? I'm absolutely biased in that, but that's going nowhere. We're going to continue to restructure and build up and add on. And as we expand and grow and continue to do what we're doing, there's more and more quality staff on the pipe. We got a data analyst, specialists, and different roles like that are going to be a part of our quality team. We have layered our training team into our quality team. So we're doing all kinds of phenomenal things with our quality staff. Shout out to Angie and Stephanie for that, and Rachel with her leave. I forgot to, my bad. You right here, and I didn't even say you. But shout out to Angie and Stephanie for holding it down, and for the future quality assurance specialists to come. But they're going nowhere. Our policies and procedures, client satisfaction surveys, the training and the technical assistance that we're offering to our provider network. In fact, quality offers that internally and externally to our provider network. So that team is going nowhere. And it's no longer quality assurance, right? Because that's just one aspect of quality. They're just quality management now. Because it's all things quality, working with all the people, lateral, horizontal, vertical, all the stuff and things. And then our CQI process, that's not going anywhere. Even though we don't have the scores as a part of it, to be honest, you saw from the last slide, we never had scores. So that's not what the CQI cycle is based on. At the end of the day, after all that work, the most we got was 12. And we always had more providers than that. So the CQI cycle, the process, the way we partner with our providers, that ambassador group, quality infrastructure, the data infrastructure, all of those things are staying because all of that stuff matters. And again, we would have never, ever been having this conversation had we not been trying to SPEP. And so with that, I'll turn it back over to Rachel to wrap it up with the specific things that we're going to be doing as next steps.
All right, so where do we go from here? We will focus our time on the things that we can control. We want to be supporting service engagement with consideration for dosage targets, and for programming aligning with research, and for supporting youth growth. I will tell you, the infrastructure of the CQI cycle has provided the structure for us to implement any new initiative. We've been implementing for the past couple of years something called growth-focused case management. And because of the infrastructure of the CQI cycle and the partnership that has already been supported by implementing SPEP, we have been able to collaborate with our provider network to inform, provide input, participate in implementing the growth-focused framework in their agencies and staff, while we are also implementing it internally. So we don't have to implement it internally and then start the work with the providers. We're doing it concurrently. And it has been, I can't tell you the number of times, like even when we have to go through processes where we're updating performance measures and things of that nature, the continuous feedback we get from our provider partners is, thank you for making us a part of this process. Thank you for making these measures something we can control. We're no longer measuring, well, of course, our stakeholders want to know about recidivism, but whether or not a youth recidivates is not something a provider can control. And their success was being measured based on whether or not a child reoffended. And so they appreciate the input. We do nothing without involving the provider ambassador group for their feedback first. This is what we think we're going to do. This is what we propose. Here is our proposal. What feedback? Will this work? The collaboration and partnership, I just can't emphasize enough, is the way we will move forward. We will revise the quality measures to continue the service, and we will continue the service classification that will help providers shoot for service dosage targets. Even now, any type of program report that we are doing, we just finished an impact report for our Credible Messenger program. Part of that report is reporting on how many youth received the minimum targeted dosage amount for mentoring, because that's what Credible Messenger program is. It's mentoring, right? And I'm happy to say that 86% of the youth met the dosage target of that program. But again, that's just another example how SPEP changed the conversation and the focus on what is important and what we can impact and what we can control. We will continue to align all our efforts with our service providers by implementing initiatives that support the youth growth and within the structure of our CQI cycle. And we will always continue to work towards better data automation. We are currently engaged in providing input to 2 different data systems that we are going to have to use in the future, one from the state and one from the county. And the conversation is always about, we need to collect our dosage data. We need to collect our dosage data. How is that going to fit into here? How is that going to fit into here? Again, it's just part of who we are now. And, Deshelle no longer has to go into the basement with the spiders. So anyway, we at Milwaukee County, like all the infrastructure that SPEP brought, will continue. We may not be scoring, but the process will continue, and it has led to better collaboration, better data automation, better data analysis so that we have data to inform the work. And at the end of the day, that's what's most important, is focusing on the positive outcomes of the youth, right? And I appreciate being part of this. It is tedious, it is time consuming, but it has brought us to where we are today, which is light years away from 12 or 13 years ago. So anyway, Deshelle, any final thoughts?
Final thoughts are really just to thank you. Again, I know many of you in this space may have approached this work for many different reasons, and you may be in this space with many different motivators. But because it touched me in a way that actually changed the trajectory, well, I keep trying to use big words if I can't say them, trajectory of my career, it matters to me in a slightly different way. It really helped me embrace the justice system in a way that I would have never done because of my own personal experiences with it and what I thought it did to my community. And so to be a part of the change, there's no words for that. So I thank you all for listening to us today. I thank everybody who was involved in bringing this initiative to Milwaukee County. Shout out to you, Gabrielle, thinking back to our lunches and our dinners and our site visits and our time in DC and Milwaukee and all the things. Melissa for hiring me. I'm her boss now, y'all. But she hired me. She hired me. So I really appreciate everybody. And that's really it. Just to thank you. Just to thank you. And for you to know that it matters to me is more than just a score. We'll turn it back over to Gabrielle and Dawn.
Thank you so much. You're making me tear up now, Deshelle. And I'm not going to say I wasn't tearing up a little bit earlier. It's just so important. Mark and I got into this work and developed this model so that we could make some changes in the juvenile justice system. And I could not be heart bursting out of my chest when you speak and talk about the changes made and what you've done. Play to your strengths. We certainly like our scores, but if it's not working and it's not doable, you do make the right choice. You have to make the right choices, and you certainly did. And I'm really, really flattered and so pleased that you guys share. Thank you, Rachel, as well, for sharing and being with your candor and sharing what you found and your experiences with this group. That's really what this group is about. And I'm so happy to have you in this community. Thank you. I'll turn it over back to Dawn.
Thank you. And I echo Gabrielle's sentiments. I really appreciate your candor, and you can tell you're passionate. And I think all of us here are passionate about what we do. So it's nice to see, the history and where it got you today. I mean, like you said, without SPEP, you wouldn't have been having these conversations. So, where is everyone now with these conversations if SPEP's been in your jurisdiction for years on end? What does that look like for you now? I know we do have some forum discussion to follow this, but did anyone have any follow-up questions as far as what Deshelle and Rachel talked about, or?
Dawn, I just have two things quick.
Sure.
Deshelle, I'm just curious a little bit about your CQI cycle, right? You mentioned that a couple of times, and it sounds like, SPEP is incorporated maybe into that CQI cycle, if I understand that. So I guess my question would be, is the goal to incorporate all of your providers into that on an annual basis, or is it not that aggressive? And I'm asking that because I'm kind of comparing that to a newer concept we've kind of rolled out with our data-driven reassessment guidelines and how that impacts scoring. So I'll let you answer, and then maybe we can talk about it a little bit.
Absolutely. The short answer is yes. Yes. But it didn't start that way. We started with the ambassadors and we had to introduce it and roll everybody in, but there was no way to do it on some people and not others. That was going to create a different set of problems. So it's the entire network. And at this phase of the game, it's a part of onboarding. So when we onboard a new provider, quality is a part of the meeting that they have to take, and you are introduced to the cycle. And we're trying to find, we have brochures that we created that have the cycle on it and the language as far as what to expect at different periods throughout the year, what that looks like, and just being able to boil down what the commitment is. Is this many meetings a year? Is this training, this particular document that you have to submit, and then this commitment to scoring? So we have that boiled down to that, but it is a part of our regular process, and every provider is expected to adhere to it as a part of being in our network. So we've got it written into RFP language and things of that nature. Those are some of the behind the scenes things that took place to be able to roll that CQI cycle into the expectation for all providers.
Yeah, it's
Michelle, would you
interesting.
like me to share the cycle visual?
Yes.
Yeah, sure.
I mean,
Yeah.
would
Well,
you guys like to see that?
yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think part of this is to try to be solution oriented, right? And I'm sure as heck not trying to change your mind on the scoring, but I will just say from a Pennsylvania perspective, I think we would absolutely face scoring challenges if we were trying to keep everybody on that cyclical basis, especially from a cohort standpoint, right? So one of the things that we've done, and it was a little bit mixed. I think we would kind of have that cohort check-in time frame where we would work with our service providers to see when they really established a full cohort so we could get back in there and look at that service. And where we've kind of moved to is more of a data-driven approach where, once they landed on a certain score, we basically have a matrix established that, okay, well, they performed really well. We probably don't need to reassess them quite as aggressively, maybe as someone who performed not as well, right? So we're finding that we're probably engaging with service providers in that very rigorous assessment process every 2 to 3, maybe even 4 years, depending on how they performed and how many times they've kind of engaged in SPEP. And I think what that's allowed us to do is it's allowed, cohorts to grow over time while we're still maintaining some level of connection. So I was just curious what that looked like.
No, I think that makes total sense. And I think as because we're keeping the process.
Yeah.
Right. So the components, the expectations when you onboard, all of those things are still going to be there. We're just not married and going to be essentially similar to what you're saying, just kind of we're saying it with different words. We're not going to be married to that score being the purpose. That's not going to be the outcome anymore. But as we get to the place where more providers are now in a good spot to be scored, right? That's a tremendous value. The flip side of that is a lot of what we've been doing locally in Milwaukee County, especially with majority of our youth being Black and brown youth, is being intentional about onboarding providers that look like the youth that we're serving, that have culturally relevant services and things that matter, not just your traditional mentoring, clinical service. That's not enough anymore. And so as we onboard those new things, classifying them, figuring out how they fit into the thing, we're looking at more grassroots agencies that just don't have the capacity to be able to keep up with all of the things that are required to score. So we have more folks in our network that maybe can't keep up with this. And so we don't want to disenfranchise them, right? Or not be intentional about engaging them. We want them in our service and service network and to be providing services, but that means a lot of services are new. Yeah. That means like getting to the place where you can score is it might be a little bit further. That doesn't mean we're not having dosage conversations. Doesn't mean we're not having quality conversations, right? We're classifying. Right? When you walk in the door, what exactly is this? You're going to get to say a whole bunch of words and put them together and just say this is what you're doing. What's the schedule? What are you using? What is the curriculum? Do you have a curriculum? Who are the facilitators? What is happening with the facility? Right? All those conversations still happen. So it's not that I don't foresee us being able to in the future at some point. But I think, and I can speak for maybe Angie and Rachel here, knowing that the score is not like the goal. There's a little bit of, okay, I need y'all to stay. I need you to stay. So that it's balancing those two.
No, I think it's really, really interesting, right? I mean, I think the score has very much been the focus in Pennsylvania for a long time, but I do think the narrative is shifting a little bit, right? Really taking a deeper dive into the components and using that as a way to frame the messaging around, service optimization, right? So we're talking a lot about that too. And the only other thing I just wanted to comment quickly on, I think it was Rachel that kind of said, maybe the provider mindset around how only measuring recidivism, having that be the only measurement for like program impact, right? We don't hear that a lot, but we hear that a little bit. And it actually came up this morning in a state leadership meeting as we're preparing for our SPEP validation in Pennsylvania. But it goes back to, I think, quality, right? In that we are trying to get providers to better think about the short-term impact of their particular service, in addition to ways that they can measure that, right? So that it's not specifically tied to recidivism, but what else are you doing? How else are you having impact? And what ways are you able to communicate some of those things, to your constituents, your key stakeholders? So I just wanted to comment on that. That came up in Pennsylvania just this morning. So I thought that was interesting.
Well, and in program evaluation, right? I just finished, thank you, Jesus, just finished this semester. But the program evaluation, we talk about the distal and the proximal outcomes, right? The short-term and the long-term outcomes. Right. And part of the reason of measuring those short-term outcomes rather than the long-term, aka recidivism in this conversation, is that you can make changes earlier on that directly affect, right? That directly affect those distal long-term outcomes. We're not saying recidivism doesn't matter. We're simply saying it's difficult to measure. There's as many definitions as there are people in a room. So is this really our target? That's not helping anyone. These shorter term things that are predictors of recidivism, and we know that, right? We've got a meta-analysis to show that among God knows how much other research out there that show that these are direct predictors and mediators, right? So identifying those and staying on top of those consistently, and that's what SPEP allows us to do, I think is really critical. And it rather than saying at the end of the day it didn't work, let's go back and retool, we can pick it up and change it as it's happening. And we can do those short-term feedback circles and feedback loops rather, to try to make some changes up front and cleanly, and doing it in a way that's pulling everybody to the table and partnering, right? Because rather than just doing it's their fault, talking to each other, not at each other.
Some of the really neat collaborative conversations we've had with the providers over the years is like, we have shelter, we have clinical services, we have mentoring, we have, people that have kids for short periods of time, providers that have kids for longer periods of time. And so when we talked about the practical application of SPEP to what they do to serve the youth and the community and the system, like some of the most fun conversations was providers are like, okay, so SPEP tells us this X amount of dosage is needed for kids, attending group, right? And so because we have the kids for a short period of time, this is what we've done to maximize the time while they're with us, right? And so that's been some of the really fun conversations with the providers, where they take the information that the SPEP gives us and then applies it to where they can and what they have control over based on where they're involved in the system, right? And so that's actually, more often than not, those are the conversations, like, how do I maximize the time that we have with the youth in this particular service, in this particular setting?
Shannon, I think your hand's up. You're free to.
Yeah, I didn't know if I could
interject.
just. One of the things I found really interesting was this provider investment measurement tool. And Deshelle, I think it was you that said it measures what matters. Can you, since we're playing show and tell here, would you be willing to share that and explain how you use that at the beginning versus with a provider that you've been working with, for a while? Do you re-administer that, or is that just sort of becomes a conversation where you keep a pulse on the engagement and readiness?
No problem. I can do that. Rachel, do you have a provider?
I'm gonna just have Angie send me one real quick.
So we're going to be able to show you one before we're done here. But I'll tell you the framework and then it'll apply to what we show you shortly. But essentially, what we did with that tool was as it relates to the CQI cycle. So what you see up here are the different pieces and components of the cycle. When do we introduce it? When do we disseminate scores? When do we have an annual information session? When do we provide training? When are the provider action plans due? When do we do the annual site visits? And that's what you see in the turquoise circles there. And then, so what we did was develop the tool in accordance with this. And so did you attend the information session? Because there's going to be tons of stuff that we share at that point that's related to just being in the network overall, things that are changing, and maybe policies that are changing, and maybe initiatives that are happening, things of that nature. But we also show several of those slides that we had in the PowerPoint where we talk about how many actually, met, how many services we SPEP'd, how many we didn't based on what the reasons are. And then we actually show how many hit the minimum targets and things of that nature. So we show that not specific providers, but aggregated. And so we share all of that information. And so the investment measurement tool is saying, did you attend that meeting? Did you attend the provider forum meetings that are bi-monthly throughout the rest of the year? Did you attend the training? Because we'll usually design a training in that November, December time during one of those provider forum meetings that is specific to what our theme is going to be for the upcoming year. And so it sets you up for training to develop your action plan and to put that together and for what we're about to embark on the next year based on what we learn from the disaggregation and analysis of the data. And so the provider investment measurement tool is specific to participating in the CQI and kind of showing up to do what we're asking you to do. And setting you up in that position. And then we give you those scores. Those scores are a part of the SPEP report, is one of the boxes within the various boxes around risk score, quality measures, dosage. Provider investment measurement score is one of the scores that we show you. And we haven't tied it to payment specific to that. We haven't tied it to payment, but it's a conversation that we're having with you regularly about how invested in this process you are. And what we've seen is something that we do annually. And because we have attendance sheets, right, at these different places, we went from having paper on the table and you sign in with the pen when you come in the room to now much is virtual, right? So we can print out attendance sheets based on who signed in. So it's evolved over time in terms of the processes that support it. But we basically track that information. Now I think we use Qualtrics or something like that, and it goes in and then we could just like run the report for that agency. But essentially, we track all of these different activities, and then we look at that in comparison to how are you actually doing with your services in terms of classification, quality. Are you meeting target dosage? Are we addressing any of the short-term problems that are coming up? Maybe you don't get, HSWs are not calling you back, or you want to come and do some more recruiting or something for your services. And so we're looking, as we're having those conversations, we're looking at how is your service doing in comparison to how invested are you in this process, because there is a short-term tangible benefit from showing up and being a part of this that you get in terms of getting clients to your services and then being able to collaborate more effectively with the staff who are overseeing or supervising those youth. And so we have that conversation in comparison with that. And then what you see is scores go up over time. People start to get, even though you can't control on pieces to the SPEP score, because if they didn't have a risk score, you're not responsible for administering the YASI. So you can't control that, for example, but you can control how you show up in this process in terms of how you're partnering with us to deliver the service. And people want a higher score. People start to get invested in it. And nobody likes sitting in a place where I'm showing you this piece of paper that says, so your investment over the year is 1. Nobody wants to hear that. They don't like that. I mean, I'm not going to dock you payment or anything like that, but just in terms of your inner achiever and how you want to be viewed as a provider, folks don't want to be looked at as people who are not invested in the process. And the folks who don't want to be measured like that, they got weeded out early on. They stood up and told me they didn't want to be a part of the process. They're not interested in having this kind of conversation. And so now we're in a place where not only do we catch you right at the front door, but because of how we're engaging you throughout the life of the year and the life of your contract with us, it's just it's a regular part of our conversation. So what you're about to see now is an example of what this looks like. And I do want to say it's evolved over the years, partnering with our provider ambassador group, revising questions, revising how we score, being willing to look at it and say, this is working, this is not. That's all been a part of the process. So I'm going to pause and allow the reactions and to share what we got on the screen. I feel like we're going to get in trouble. It's 2:30. Is we still supposed to be talking? Is it
You
okay?
are, if you're as interesting as you've
Okay.
been. He's still talking. I remember the ambassador program, the SPEP ambassadors.
Mhm.
I remember you talking about that as you were going to set up, and I thought it was the best idea, and I'm quite sure I've dropped dime on it and talked about it about 5-6 other states after, because I thought it was such a great idea, and you had it working, clearly continued to work really, really well.
It is still working.
That was
It
your
is still
baby.
working. Alive and
So-
alive and well. Go ahead, Rachel.
Yes, so this is the provider investment measurement tool that we score and share at the annual site visits. And you can see that it's very positive intentionally. It's there, we try not to give any feedback that would decrease collaboration. And so some of the things that we look at, the questions are, did they attend the annual information session? Did they have representation at the information session? Did they attend the training that we do every year in November, which is related to what their action plans are going to be about for the coming year? Did the agency complete and submit their action plan on time? Did they accommodate and participate in the site visits? Does the agency, do they have representation at all the bi-monthly meetings throughout the course of the year? And did they complete an improvement project in their action plan? And then to encourage their engagement with the contract process, we also have a question about that, although that doesn't happen every year. So those are the questions that we discuss with them every year, and we thank them for their partnership and their collaboration, because we aren't able to easily implement any new initiative without their partnership. Like, it's not us doing it to them, we are doing it with them. And they notice the difference and they are grateful for it. And they have repeatedly said as much. So I'll stop sharing now.
Thank you. That was really helpful. It's always interesting to see how different jurisdictions use the SPEP and use tools to engage the providers. In Pennsylvania, we're a little bit different because, we work for Penn State. So as implementation specialists, we're the intermediary between probation and provider, and contracts are totally without, we have no control over those contracts at all. And those, there's some interesting things going on around the state about trying to make contracts with, or develop contracts with providers, between probation and provider. Since they're all county specific, is to get some sort of standardization of some of the things that everybody's looking for. And SPEP is going to be one of those things that's on it. I know some counties right now, we have 67 counties here. So when you say Milwaukee kind of operates like its own, we recognize that that's very similar to some of the counties that we have here. And that can be very good. There's nothing wrong with that, but it's always interesting to see how people tackle this creative process of engagement. So thank you. That was nice.
And it looks like, I think it's Danielle had asked, would you mind sharing the brochure that you get to providers? Is that something that you guys would mind sharing with everyone? Maybe not as a show and tell now, but is it
I know.
something?
If you guys didn't see, there were some resource links that Deshelle had put in there.
Oh,
and I
I'm
was,
sorry. I'm
no,
sorry.
that's okay. I don't think that was one of them, but I was like, they can take the whole 2 hours. Like, too bad we didn't have 4. It's just so interesting to me, and just all the pieces you do. And like Shannon just said, it's just to hear you guys have made it work and the things that you're focusing on. I think we're really all focusing on the same things. It's just, we go about it different ways, but yeah, I don't know if it's something you want to, if you're able to attach it as a link, or you just share on your screen, Daniel, I'm not sure. Or maybe, this could be one of those resources we add to our resource page that I've been asking everyone to send me stuff.
So what I'm gonna do is share. I'm gonna let Rachel look for the most updated version. I'm gonna share an example of what one looked like back when I was doing the work. I had Rachel's job maybe 3 years ago. I think I've been a director for about 3 years now. So I have some older versions. So our logo has changed. Our skill set has improved. Like I'm not gonna, no, I'm telling. Rachel was so upset about actually sharing that blueprint as a part of our PowerPoint. I need to tell this to everybody because our PowerPoint game has improved so much since then that she was like, that's embarrassing. Cannot show that. Well, can I change the color? Can I do this? And I'm like, you can't do that because it's history. Change history, Rachel. So we're going back and forth about how much to share. Can you guys still see or hear?
Yeah, it looks like I see a presentation, but something popped up that said Zoom quit unexpectedly. I hope we're not losing one of you. And I think we lost her.
Did we lose Deshelle? She'll be back shortly.
Okay. Yeah, I wasn't sure whose screen we were seeing. Oh, wait, there she is.
I am back.
Okay.
It told me I wasn't welcome anymore and that I was talking too much. But no, I kept getting some kind of message saying that Zoom is gonna quit. Zoom got an error. So I'll try one more time to share my screen and show you an example of what the trifold brochure looked like. So for context, the inside was the cycle that we shared with you before. And this is what the other side looked like. Can you guys see that?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so this page left blank. We inserted that graph that you saw before. And then this is what the trifold would look like. So this would be the cover with our then mission statement, logo, so on and so forth. This was the back cover. And then we had our link. Oh yeah, we would have QR codes now. Our name has changed like 17 times since then. This is no longer the administrator. All of that has changed. It would be much prettier now. And then some language about what the CQI is. And so this would be a regular thing that quality staff would keep in their bag. Every time we were doing our action plans or sharing information, it would be a part of the report that you would get. It would be a part of onboarding for providers. It would be a part of regular conversation to help you understand what the CQI cycle was. And then when you open it up, you would have a picture of the graph of the cycle in there. And it was a way to make sure we were having conversations about the overall message, but then also being able to say to you tangibly, listen, this is 6 meetings a year, an action plan and a training. And so the rest of the stuff is what you already did. And the provider forum meetings, which was our every other month, those were already regular requirements. It was just that they might be canceled. Like they weren't taken seriously. There were no one who was like overseeing them and making sure that the quality of the information shared was relevant, was pertinent. And so that's a part of what quality took over for programming. So no, this is no longer an optional meeting. This is a space we need to come in. We provide training in this space. We share information. We collaborate. We made the space much more intentional. So it wasn't something extra that folks had to do. It was a commitment to what was already there. And then we use those 6 meetings a year. One of them, we would provide training. So we would extend the time a little bit, and then we would do some kind of relevant training that we would bring in. And then the only other extra thing was the info session that we did in the fall every year, because that was around the time we finished SPEPing. So once we gathered the data from the year before, and then we spent the time analyzing, dissecting it, doing all those things, creating the reports, and then we shared the reports, and then we had an information session that was designed just to talk about the reports, the CQI cycle, what to expect and what it meant, and all of those different kind of things. And we would give our ambassadors awards during those times when our turnover in our quality staff, when new staff would get trained or certified in SPEP, they would get awards saying you officially certified at this time. So we would do different creative things to keep our folks engaged at that info session and make sure it mattered. It mattered to folks. It wasn't just a waste of time.
Is that brochure something, like when you do find the most up-to-date version, is that something you would mind us putting on our resource page? Or any of the links of information you sent us?
No, no,
Not at all.
not at all.
I transparently, I need to update it again.
Okay. Well, no rush. Don't do it on our account.
I mean, in full transparency, I think our name and brand has changed like 4 times since we've started this. So when we talk about staff turnover and capacity and having materials that continue to stay up to date with, you know, the future state and everything that's happened, that's a real issue. It's a real issue. But now we've got a new brand, new colors. And this particular branding cycle is specific. They lay out the numbers of the color. So when you are in the PowerPoint or you are in the computer, you can't just pick the color you like. You have to go in and match the number from the branding site in the computer with the color that you're choosing and make sure the numbers match. And then that is the right color. You cannot alter the logo. You cannot just have this side of the M or that side of the M. Like, it is very, so it's gotten better over the years. I appreciate that level of detail. I'm not complaining about it. I'm just explaining why it may be hard to keep up with all the parts and pieces as we've continued to evolve over the years. But I like the colors now. That turquoise is awesome to me.
It's got to be aesthetically pleasing. I was already telling Rachel I really like the PowerPoint and the colors, and it looked.
It's our new brand. That's why Rachel was really upset with that blueprint. She was like, this doesn't match. This does not match. You should have literally saw us in meetings going back and forth. She's like, well, can I just change this? Rachel, it is history. You can't change history. Like, that's like a fact. And she's like, well, I don't like this. We literally spent about 15 minutes arguing about whether or not we was going to change the way the blueprint looked to match our new colors. You should see these 2 control freaks.
I can imagine.
It's real. It's real.
Well, I know up next on our agenda, we had the open forum discussion, but I definitely don't want to, stop this any sooner than as far as if anyone had any other questions or further explanation of things, as far as Milwaukee's concerned. Okay, well, I will go ahead and let's see. Get my PowerPoint slide with the topics. I mean, basically, we're just continuing on with what, Milwaukee was relating to as far as challenges and barriers. Is there anyone that feels comfortable talking about their jurisdiction as far as what components are most important to you? As far as your jurisdiction and what you focus on. I mean, is anyone sort of deviating maybe from that very regimented step-by-step SPEP assessment to get that SPEP score, or, any of the newer ones experiencing those challenges to be able to get to that point? I know Virginia is some of our newer jurisdictions that's joined us as far as doing SPEP about 3 years now, I think they've been doing SPEP.
I can share from Florida.
Oh, great. Thank you, Sarah.
The first time I've chimed in all of the meetings. So we too have had some challenges with staff turnover over the last several years. So we've fallen behind a little bit with getting the full reports out. We go into our programs quarterly, we publish reports annually, and we analyze data annually, but they're done in separate offices and all put together by me. And I'm one person, so we kind of fell behind. What we found to be the most critical piece through our years of evolving SPEP here in Florida has been the data. So we, unfortunately, it's now tied to performance measures, the SPEP outcomes, they're specifically the dosage. So what we have had to kind of pivot to do over the last 9 months or so has been we're getting the data and we're analyzing it before we can really do the full communication of how everything went as a whole for our system in Florida, specific to the one program. So the individual programs themselves have the opportunity to see, are we providing exactly the right amount of service for for our needs, for our kids, for the contract compliance. With our folks going in quarterly, they are providing continuous feedback. It's just not a formal process that we've really had the opportunity to publish this fiscal year. So that's what we found to be the most important was the weeks and the hours, and the easiest for us to aggregate for them. Thanks.
Thank you for sharing that. And just to give you some kudos though, we really like your reports. We've seen, we're always Googling and looking for things to see how people do it. So we've always liked your reports are very straightforward. They are as far as the information. So, I mean, data, Shannon alluded to, and we've talked about this a lot, 67 counties doing 67 different things with all their own providers. You can imagine data collection. That's just one of those things we run into that can really just slow up the process. So that's, even though we're still trying to get those full scores, our focus hopefully for this year and the next couple of years is really just touching every service that's being offered in Pennsylvania. Unfortunately, we don't really have like a provider network as far as the entire state is concerned. So that's one of the things that, again, we're going to try to focus on. We do rely on probation to kind of be that partner at the table when we're going through these assessments. But if we can meet these providers without probation, we're going to be able to do that as long as everyone's in agreement, which the more we've talked to departments to see, hey, you don't have the bandwidth or the capacity to be able to do this. Can we do it for you? So that's what's unique for us as far as EPIS and with Penn State and Pennsylvania is being able to really maybe do that heavy lift for probation and really get in there and just, again, kind of touch every service. So we know what is out there for every county, every jurisdiction, what's being offered, and then eventually, hopefully get to a SPEP score.
Looks like we've got a couple raised hands. We've got
Okay, great.
And Michelle.
Yeah, and I think, Dawn, I'm going to kind of build off where you were going with that. I'm real curious for Michelle and Rachel, and then for Sarah, when you're talking about the number of providers and services that you're coming into contact with, what does that look like? It sounds like you have a pretty similar process in terms of the frequency that you're getting in and looking at these services. What's kind of that number of services that we're talking about?
Do you mean like number of total services? Because, or do you mean like, I guess, can you clarify that? Like the number of services in our network or the number of providers or both?
It could, you're right, it's a loaded question. I guess specifically I'm looking at what are the number of services that you're touching with the SPEP process in terms of that annual, the CQI review, those sorts of things. I think, and you mentioned that, there were like 52 that weren't able to have the full scores and 12 that were. So I just was kind of looking at what is kind of your total number of services that you're dealing with.
Well, and I haven't touched that data since last September. So let me give an educated guess. We have about 30 providers, and we have numerous providers that have multiple services that they provide that are in their contracts. And so we have, let's say we have one provider that they have a residential care facility. They provide group, they provide level 2 predispo programming. They provide, like there's a list of things that they can provide within their contract. So for instance, that one particular provider on their cover sheet for their report, they might have 12 services listed. To give you an exact number, I can't do that right now, but
no, that was fine. I just was trying to put it into the context of the data that you talked about in the presentation to see how many you guys were dealing with. So, and kind of the same question for Sarah, what, if you had to ballpark the number of providers and then potentially the number of services.
So we have about 60 different programs statewide. Some of them are co-located. We look at about 115 different services. I say different services. There might, we tend to look at the manualized curricula. We don't have a lot of homegrown stuff that we're stepping right now. So there's about 16 different like curricula we look at, over 115-ish reports a year.
Okay.
I will say in Florida, though, we're really spoiled when it comes to data. We have one brain, one mainframe for our juvenile information, and we have a specific module that we built. So we were not in the basement digging up files. We do sometimes get cobwebs and cockroaches because, you know, we're in Florida, but for the most part, we were really spoiled with our data. So sorry.
That's
I
actually
usually,
what I
a presentation. I'm sorry, go ahead.
that was actually the question I was gonna ask. I remember visiting Florida, and I was like, do you guys still have that PhD level state data collection? We still talk about that now, like, if only.
If you're talking about Dr. Baglivio, he is now with a private provider, but we do have several doctors who work in our research office.
Melissa, like, yes, this is funny, yes.
So you were talking about Bags? Yeah, he's still around.
Nice. Nice. Yeah, I'm sorry, I'm just
Were there any other questions regarding that? And I mean, Krista's our data manager as far as for EPIS. So I was telling her about, because Rachel and Deshelle gave me a little bit of a preview or demo of their data collection of how the providers actually enter it in. I'm like you said, if only, Deshelle, like if only we had that, like we're still using Excel sheets. We do have a juvenile case management system. You know, in the perfect world, we're going to eventually get all of that entered in there, but it's still, you know, maybe 10 years from now, possibly, but and we've come a long way too, as efficiency and what Krista is able to do and pull and work with. And, you know, we do have a relationship with our state to be able to get risk scores, at least, where before we had providers digging through paper referrals, trying to find risk scores, and then following up with probation, like, what do you guys have for the risk level? So I think, you know, leaps and bounds for sure from day one.
Well, as we move through this process, my co-presenter is pulling the data from last year while we're talking. So we can say we had 9 closed services last year, and we had 98 services that were reviewed.
you should see our chat over here. I was like 715. She's like, wait, what? I was like, no, okay,
Yeah.
wait. That's the hours for the CBT mixed counseling and social skills. The services was 90. That's us chatting back and forth outside of here, like, but yeah. So what Rachel said.
To the point of the Florida data situation, it's an anomaly. You guys should definitely know it's an anomaly throughout the US and Australia to have that kind of data capability, and then the folks who can run it. I do routinely presentation on implementation in the implementation science zone about the challenges to implementing SPEP or implementing any models and or programs. And routinely, it's everything we've mentioned, right? The most common are data, staffing issues, these kinds of things. But I always give the caveat, except for, you know, a state like Florida, data is always an issue. I also sometimes, and I don't name y'all Milwaukee, but if you recall, the situation with the data situation was so bad when we started. Y'all had to get new hardware. Your computers couldn't even upgrade to like the newest version of Excel or something. I distinctly remember that. I don't call you out on that, but I use that routinely in my implementation science presentation of, you know, there's this to that, yeah. So there was a hardware issue from the get-go as well. And then the other side of the other side of that spectrum is the great Florida databases and folks who can run the data and make good sense out of it. I just wanted to share that.
What we all aspire to, right?
That happened.
Well, I know we're about 14 minutes left. I mean, we could call it short and just say, hey, nice seeing y'all. You guys can get on with your day, or any other final thoughts. Or, you know, one of the questions that we had was, what do you focus on for your components? Like, what's an area that you would work towards, or you think that the provider should maybe focus on during a performance improvement part of that process or the cycle. But that's, definitely we're meeting again this year. I have September, let's see, 18th is our hold. I mean, as far as we're concerned, that is our date, but I'll definitely send out a, sort of a save the date type of thing in our recap email and along with the recording once that's available. But, oh, I see a nice little graph you sent us, Deshelle.
I'm all in SPEP land now. I'm all happy.
Okay.
Little butterflies are released. And I'm like, this is an example of something we show in an info session. Nobody asked that. I know. Nobody asked. Just doing stuff.
Well, Chris is really great at pie graphs and things to break out stuff because it is, sharing that with our stakeholders quarterly when we have our learning community meetings, our SPEP infocoms. I mean, that's just to see that in that sort of graphic, that's really telling. And you can see, one of our goals is to find out where there might be some gaps. We've got a bunch of CBTs, but do we have enough mentoring or do we have enough, that's another focus as far as what we're doing with that outreach to all the counties, is trying to figure out what does the state need? Where can we focus our resources as far as new providers that can come in and, fill those areas that aren't being addressed. Data
The value
is
of charts and graphs can never be underestimated, or overestimated rather. It really kind of, the picture says about the million words or whatever kind of thing. It really makes a difference, I think. And especially for quick pieces of knowledge when you're dealing with legislators or county managers or folks, judges, that can be so impactful. The kind of a graph or something quick to digest, because otherwise people get lost in meaning or they misinterpret. These things are hard to misinterpret.
Sorry, I lost my screen and I'm trying to get back to you guys so I can actually do something. Okay. All right. There we are again. Okay. Well, so if there's no final thoughts, then I think we're okay to wrap up. I was going to just share my last slide of the PowerPoint just so we can be on the same page if this will even advance. I think my mouse must have died because things aren't working. There we go. No, we're not taking a break. Okay, here we go. September 18th. We're sticking with the 2 p.m. EST for now. Depending on where we are with things, we would definitely like to highlight in other jurisdictions. So as I mentioned, when I send out a recap, I'll also be sending a Qualtrics link to be able to, for you guys to be able to put in your contact information, just so I make sure I have everything correct as far as names, spellings, credentials, titles, the department you're with, best way to reach you other than email if that was a thing. And depending on where we go with the jurisdiction highlight, as far as pure learning topics, that's definitely something we can sort of build into it, depending on where we go with, kind of from where we went with today, as far as, is it more than just the score or there components we can focus on? We definitely want this meaningful for you guys. So feel free to reply to the email too with some suggestions if there was anything in particular you're looking for. I know we've talked about having sort of some feedback given, and I know Deshelle and Rachel, you're talking about improving your quality measures as far as revamping and things like that. I mean, we definitely want to be a sounding board for everyone. So, even if it's a matter of sharing, Kathy was gracious enough to share with us what she'd worked through in Iowa and, kind of where things are moving with her new quality measures that she's doing her checklist. So that's definitely something we would share on our resources page. So with that, anything else?
Just Mark Lipsy wasn't able to be with us, but he wanted me to share with you that he says hello and he's doing well and he's enjoying his grandchildren. So he is generally retired. I'd say probably 90% retired at this point, but just was not able to join us, but said hi and appreciates every one of you and all the amazing work you do.
Well, we'll take grandkids too. They can join.
They probably
You
will
gotta
one
get them
day.
learning SPEP. They're never too young, right?
They're exactly. They're his grandkids too. They're probably little geniuses.
Oh my gosh, yeah. Well, we need someone to take in over your footsteps, both of you. Like who's their next one? Who's the successors to this?
Indeed. Indeed.
All right. Well, I appreciate everyone's time today. Thank you so much. As always, it's wonderful to see you all, and I appreciate your time. And Deshelle and Rachel, thank you so much for sharing. We really, really enjoyed it. I don't know if you saw everyone sending comments. They just really enjoyed your information and your sharing, and we appreciate your time and energy with that. So thank you.
So great. So great. Thank you guys.
Thank you.
All right.
Thanks,
Well, everyone
everyone.
take care.
Have a good day, everyone.
Take care. See you
Bye,
guys.
everyone.
Bye. I
That
think,
went well.
yeah, do you have a way to stop recording?
Yeah, I do.
Okay.
Thank you. Stop